Pleasure, everybody. Hi, Space Watchers. Welcome to our Space Café Summit, Occupied Space. Where are we going? It is Thursday evening, 6 p.m. in Switzerland and Europe, and it's Space Café Summit Web Talk time. Our Space Café Web Talk today hosts a very high-level panel of three international experts, and we want to discuss future of space, current technologies, disruptions, and regulations and frameworks. I warmly welcome Pascale Ehrenfreund, President of the International Astronautical Federation, Martinez, Executive Director of the Secure World Foundation, and Kenneth Hodgkins, President of the International Space Enterprise Consultants. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Humankind expands into space. Thanks. Now, let me just maybe get started with a little introduction, and I hope my connection is still working and you can see and hear me. Humankind, Pascale, Peter, and Ken, expands into space at an unprecedented pace. More and more nations are launching their space programs, as we all know, and the planet's superpowers, often under the flag of sovereignty these days, fiercely compete with each other and with private super entrepreneurs also, and compete for the pole position in low orbits and in the outer space. We're seeing high ambitions, we're seeing deep pockets, we're seeing a lot of optimism, but also questions about our frameworks governing these activities. And more, we are also hearing critical voices. Now, Peter, Ken, Pascale, as we said, mega constellations, space safety, traffic management, tourism, hotels in space, settlements on Moon and Mars. What are actually the big trends you see? What are the major technologies that are driving our race to space today? What are the ambitions? What's key for you? Maybe, Peter, we start with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in today's discussion. Looking forward to an interesting conversation with my fellow panelists, and also greetings to all my colleagues that I see in the virtual audience today. You kind of summed up really the main technological sort of developments that we are all witnessing in the space arena nowadays. And for me, it's more than just the technologies that define these trends. You know, we are seeing a much greater number and diversity of space actors than was the case even 10, 15 years ago. We are seeing the emergence of new kinds of space activities, such as various kinds of rendezvous and proximity type operations in space that would be foundational building blocks for a future space economy. We are seeing the proliferation of commercial actors in space, many of whom are entering the space sector from other domains, not traditional space enterprises, bringing all sorts of new perspectives, new approaches with them. We are seeing the development of the use of space resources, which is something that we will have to do if humanity is to have a permanent presence in space. And we're also seeing some negative developments. There is concern around the growing proliferation of debris in space. Also as more countries become reliant on space systems for their national security and defense needs, they are taking steps to protect those against disruption or denial or destruction by potential adversaries. And so we're seeing a worrying proliferation of counter space capabilities. Many of the capabilities that we need for the exciting on-orbit activities also have dual-use potential. So these technologies raise concerns in that regard. Also, in terms of the trend, what we're seeing is that non-traditional sources of funding in the space arena, basically billionaires with strong interests in space or venture capital funds that are making lots of funding available for these new space actors that are entering the space arena, sometimes not quite realizing that they are entering a fragile and strategic environment. So these are some of the trends that I see, which have very exciting promises, but also raise a number of concerns that I'm sure we'll come back to and discuss. And I'd be interested to hear the views of my fellow panelists on this question.
Well, yeah, I'll chime in. First of all, thank you, Markus and SpaceWatch.Global for putting on this panel, which I think is going to be highly interesting, and welcome to everybody who is joining us. When I was thinking of the disruptive technologies, there are, you've noted some in your initial question, but one of the fundamental issues that we have to deal with that in and of itself is disruptive is the fact that our government policy making processes are always so far behind technological developments and new ventures. And that's not a good position to be in my view, because that adds uncertainty to the business model for these new ventures, but it also adds uncertainty on in the global community as to who is going to be responsible for these new ventures that could in fact have an impact on others. Like Peter was mentioning, space traffic management, these massive constellations are up there, and then you have a country that launches its first small sat, and how do they know that it's not going to get slammed into, as we almost had the case with OneWeb and Starlink. So that's one of the disruptive things, if you will, on a negative side. Disruptive on the positive side are the other new technologies. Peter mentioned space mining, using nuclear power as an enabling technology. In low Earth orbit, there have been proposals to use that for space tugs, as well as using nuclear power to get to the moon, or to get to Mars, or for the permanent presence on the moon, where we'll have to look at the issues related to nuclear. Another disruptive technology. The proliferation of new actors in space, traditional and non-traditional, is another major trend that I think will continue. And the other trend is the new launching states. We have, over the past 6 decades, we have the launching states today, but we have a new one in the form of New Zealand. We have the potential of having 3 others: UK, Australia, and Canada. That all requires a certain amount of reflection on the impact that will have on the global community as we're launching more and more things into space. And we have more launching states who, under the treaties, are ultimately responsible. Point-to-point transportation, where you go into space but come straight back down as opposed to going into orbit. How will we manage that? Will that be a function of air law or space law? What are the implications there? And again, disruptive technology that's going to force the policymakers to have to deal with this sooner rather than later. 3D printing, I'm always fascinated with that notion. Making a satellite in space, how exactly is that work? What are the rules of the road while you're printing the satellite. I just don't know enough about it from a technological standpoint, but I can imagine that there are certain things in terms of 3D printing in orbit that you would have to watch out for as a function of space traffic management. But then as a legal matter, when does that become a space object? After it's printed, or from the point from where the material to do the 3D printing was launched from. And so all of these issues have, or all of these disruptive technologies have huge potential. And what we need to make sure is that nothing is put into place that would discourage this kind of culture of entrepreneurship. But then again, we have to look at the downsides as well and how to deal with those. So thank you.
Pascale,
yeah.
When you look at the big picture, would you think that it's enough to talk about technologies that disrupt our levels of activity in space, that accelerate, or is it more than technologies that drive the whole movement?
Well, certainly R&D is certainly a driver, but obviously, you have always to convince politicians and governments in order really, to bring the money in. And additionally, you have really to engage society if you want to have a sustainable space exploration, be it in low Earth orbit or be it in the lunar and Mars environment. So I try not to repeat what has been said, but I think it's quite important to say that we have a really incredible dynamic global space economy, estimated or valued in 2020 to be $385 billion. And that we are in a disruptive stage somehow of the industry and the public sector. We have unprecedented entrepreneurial leadership and private investment, and we have a lot of advances right now in manufacturing technologies, artificial intelligence, and reusable launch, as has been already discussed. So the costs are falling. And we have easier access to space for the many countries which also want to join now. So looking at the deep space exploration market, because we have my colleagues have talked a little bit already, but looking really there, this technology market is also expected to show a significant growth, and it is extremely dynamic. What has been done actually last year in 2020 and what is going to be done in 2021 is quite fantastic, with the Mars missions, the lunar sample return mission, the sample return mission from asteroids. It is extremely vibrant, and I think I see that actually quite positive, that you have like an innovation ecosystem, that you have the space agencies which work with primes and SMEs and startups and space entrepreneurs together. I think this is the way to go. Obviously, there's always some competition, but in generally, I think that is really bringing us in the future that we actually work together and drive us, all together. So I have to say we have to have some reality check because when we talk about lunar outposts and robotic villages and what we are seeing now getting realized, these are missions which have been planned decades ago. So really many agencies have studies, on lunar outposts, a robotic village on the moon since decades. And the same also applies to, for instance, to Mars sample return mission, which also started decades ago and hopefully will be realized in the next decade. And so we have somehow a little bit, I think, to understand what are the major steps and disruptions that make bold and endeavors happen, and to make them happen a little bit faster, because right now it really took very long. And I think we have to keep the momentum. And obviously, disruptive technologies, R&D is always a key. But it's not the only thing. But in particular, when we want to really enhance the deep space sector and deep space exploration, we need spaceships that bring us there safely. We need habitats. We need landers. We need drills. We need to really develop well in situ resource utilization, life support systems, you name it. We could probably go on. And I think you cannot really, artificial intelligence will play a really, really important role in robotics and navigation and communication into deep space, optimizing missions. That will be a key, but to convince governments, for instance, why deep space missions are so important, looking at the rationales, promoting the rationales, and also really engaging society is also a very important point.
Now, I think we are all on the side of progress, and we are all aficionados of technology, and we believe in the capabilities of humankind to develop things, and we also like acceleration, and we like, Ken, as you indicated, also this kind of entrepreneurial approach, also from a political side, to say, let them go. I mean, let them do. Here's initiatives. That's great, and money is flowing in like crazy, nearly, in the space sector, driving all this, but nevertheless, Pascale, does it not make you nervous sometimes that things are moving into all directions at uncontrollable speed and anything goes, and people are creating facts actually that haven't even been thought about by societies, haven't even been thought about by politics and governments? Does that not make you nervous?
Obviously, I think it doesn't make you nervous, but it is a duty, in order really to try to shape also these activities, and as a scientist. So I think over the past 5 decades, the international space community has really gradually developed a complex framework. In particular, to balance exploration and the use of assets and resources in Earth's orbit. Obviously, it can be improved. My 2 fellow colleagues are experts here on a panel on this topic. UN COPOS deals with many issues. But I think right now, this does not apply to space environments beyond Earth's orbit, and this is so I will talk a little bit about that. Because the extended partnerships which we have with the private sector and between countries make it really essential to reach some durable solutions and to raise awareness. There has to be a dialogue. So we have now to really think proactively about, environmental stewardship or stewardship of planetary environments and resources beyond Earth's orbit. This is really required, and I think it's really important to start, from draft agreements to guidelines to a legal regime, and to prepare a really flexible approach that balances the interests of multiple stakeholders. So with regulations that are also really respected and adhered to by many nations, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So I think plans to guide human activities, for instance, this is something which is really, we have to try to formulate it before there are really increasing demands for access and exploitation, and before all that is beyond of control. And that has actually to be yesterday. And science, I think, and also R&D is a really important contributor, because there are always continuously new planetary findings. So just a few sentences. You should prepare a flexible approach in a dialogue with many different stakeholders. And of course, there are already treaties, for instance, on Earth, for instance, the Antarctic Treaty System, which, have basic elements which are interesting, for this kind of draft agreements and guidelines. And these treaties, like the Antarctic Treaty, are very flexible, and they are amended continuously, and that really somehow resonates with what we are experiencing in space, that we always learn more about our environment. And I think it is very important to disseminate information, and to that since it's a multi-stakeholder approach, that everybody is involved, and organizations like COSPAR, the Committee of Space Research, which is already very engaged since decades on the topic of planetary protection, IAEA, the United Nations, other international organizations should really help to articulate the detailed operational guidelines for missions in the solar system.
Peter, do you agree? Are we really seeing that the current frameworks that are evolving and the frameworks that are in place are sufficient enough and evolving enough and quickly enough in order to guide and manage all these plans, ambitions, and expectations? What's your view, Peter?
Yeah, well, I tend to agree with Ken that the development of technology happens at a much faster pace than the wheels of government and regulation can turn. But I think that this is something that we need to acknowledge and try to see how we can adapt our multilateral and national institutions and processes to deal with this reality. The Outer Space Treaty has served us well for over 60 years. I know that sometimes people remark that the Outer Space Treaty is outdated and it doesn't encompass all of the current activities. But the fact of the matter is that whatever treaty we have in place will eventually be outpaced by technological and other developments. And so there is really, I think, among states not much of an appetite to reopen the treaty. And indeed, I think it would be very dangerous to do so, because we might lose some of the really cherished things in the Outer Space Treaty, such as the principle of non-appropriation, of course. So I think what we need to do is to promote greater adherence to the Outer Space Treaty and the other treaties. We need to clarify some of the concepts, and this has indeed been done in fora like COPUOS, which has produced a number of principles and other non-binding instruments such as guidelines and so on, which often, although they are non-binding, they often find expression in national laws and regulations, which gives them a certain legal character as well. Also, we need, I think, improved coordination among national regulators so that we can avoid phenomena like regulation shopping and so on, which would lead to sort of a kind of a Wild West scenario. So I think what we should strive towards is improving our effective cooperative global governance of space activities, and there are three principal ways in which we can do this. One is to strive towards an agreed common vision of what the future of space should look like, and fora like COPUOS, IAF, and others are ideal for this kind of discussion, so that we can develop and agree on and eventually adhere widely to international norms and best practices. The second approach, I think, is to try and improve the responsiveness and effectiveness of multilateral institutions. And so in the space domain, for example, this could involve things like improved cooperation among various multilateral fora and even different branches of the UN that deal with the peaceful and the disarmament aspects of space. And the third avenue is trying to enhance national regulatory frameworks that balance international obligations under these treaties with national priorities.
And Peter, you don't fear that, or don't see that we are living in a world where actually, or can you certainly have an answer to that too, live in a world where sovereignty becomes more and more important, trade wars are getting fiercer, national interests might create hidden agendas, and so the multilateral level, the international level, becomes more and more difficult. Don't you see that?
It is a possibility. I mean, if you were to look at the different ways that the space arena could evolve, this could certainly be one of those, which could result in confrontations and conflict in the outer space environment. And this is why it's so important to have fora like Corpus, where countries can talk about common interests and concerns and try and build cooperation among states, because cooperation leads to interdependence. But I'll let Ken come in.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Well, I would take I don't disagree with what's been said before, concerning the question, Markus, that you've put forward, but I would take a different approach, and that is what we need is a sustainable platform for the civil society to have input on how we straighten out what you would call the wild, wild west, in the sense that you should have a bottom-up approach on what civil society, and I use that in the broadest sense, needs in order to accelerate the space architecture, accelerate the space enterprise, rather than the government's trying to decide. So you need to decide what is best for the entrepreneurs. So you need some kind of mechanism where civil society can speak freely about the things that they need at a domestic level as well as at an international level to create this predictable, transparent, and equal international framework through which new innovations can take place. And using COPUOS is fine, but that's all government driven. The civil society is only an observer in the committee. So you need something where the civil society is on par with everybody else. And that to me is one of the key elements to the future of the space enterprise, but also taking into account all the rapid developments that Pascale and Peter have talked about. And then in the end, straightening out the legal framework has to really be done at the domestic level. And the outer space treaties provide for that. There's really, as Peter said, there's no appetite for a new treaty. If you were to say we are going to negotiate a new treaty all-encompassing, you would bring the space enterprise to a screeching halt, because they would have to wait 10 years for governments to figure it out and then decide what to do. So you really have to balance these rapid developments with what the governments are capable of doing, but also what the civil society wants the governments to do to help them reduce uncertainty, reduce conflicts on a commercial basis.
Pascale, yeah, important point, looking at society. We might say that actually we are lucky today because people who have not a lot of interest in really technology as such. But people are largely applauding space. Every rocket launch is fascinating. Every Mars rover is watched by millions of people. But that might turn, right? If we are not able, for example, to get the space debris question answered and done very quickly, you might see society react differently to space activities. Especially under the green and sustainability aspect. Do you fear that, Pascale, that something like this might happen, that space industry and actors and spacefaring states might actually lose the support of the people?
You mean concerning space exploration?
Yes.
I cannot imagine that because it takes, a long time to prepare space missions, and they have always a strict goal. I think this is long-term planning by space agencies, and now also with other actors. So I think this interest and this enthusiasm for space exploration, for space discovery, to understand our solar system, that will always stay. And obviously, I think society knows much too little about space because they all type on the iPhone and really never think about how important satellites are and all this broadband activity all over the world with constellations. I do not really think that society is completely aware of that. They take it when it's there, but they do not see somehow that it is in space. So the space awareness is, I think, something very important. And I think concerning space exploration, we are explorers, and we want to understand the fundamental questions. Where do we come from? How did our solar system form? What is new about the universe? And I think that is something which we, of course, have to cherish, and we have to continue, bring awareness. But this scientific discovery, so it is, I cannot imagine that now scientific missions, scientific discovery missions are not anymore done or not anymore funded.
Ken, do you agree? You were really mentioning societal support as a very important element of policy making.
Yes. So the point I wanted to make is when I refer to civil society, it really is the commercial sector, the scientific sector, and the general public. Stakeholders that use space but don't know they in fact are using space. In the form of your cell phone runs off the atomic clocks from GPS, and there has to be a mechanism for the civil society to have some kind of input. We don't really have that. I mean, in the U.S., we have, we have the Federal Register that allows public comment on certain regulations, but that's really not getting to the heart of the issue, which is how does civil society view space as beneficial to their everyday lives? How do you balance the enormous amount of money that we will be spending going to the moon and Mars and other celestial bodies with other societal demands? And how do we kind of capture the imagination of the new generation of space actors, the young people, beyond being being taken or following Star Wars or Star Trek? Is there a role for the mass media to go beyond simply the entertainment part of space to more of messaging on why this is beneficial? How do we put that into the context of just the general public thinking about space? And again, you have the people who follow the rovers, you have the people that watch Star Wars, but then you have a whole other group in between that that we need to really be focusing on. And that gets to the whole point of why do we want to go and explore? Why do we want to risk sending humans, into orbit and beyond? And what are the societal benefits of that?
Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Peter, thanks, Ken. Yeah, sorry, there was just a silence in my earphone. Peter, how far do we have to go actually when we want to talk about framing these activities and having societal agreement on them? How far are we, and how far do we have to go to regulate the traffic, when actually we recently saw that two satellites got 60 meters close to each other, and this is getting more populated. So this was not the last time that happened, and next time they will even get closer. How far do we have to go in order to apply sustainability criteria and ESG criteria to space activities, and have green laws also apply? Or even how far do we have to go in order to answer the questions, what happens to a community of 200-300 people that live in a village, a Mars village that actually has been installed and invested by a private man, which constitution and which laws are the government at the end? Are they more urgent questions, and what is mid and long term necessary to regulate and to discuss and to agree on?
Thank you, Marcus. You broke up a bit there while you were asking your question, but I think I got the general gist of it. Well, I think we still have quite a long way to go. We have made some progress in socializing awareness of the urgency of the issue of space sustainability. And this in itself is a significant step forward. I would say 10, 15 years ago, the potential problems of space sustainability, I'm talking about debris, congestion, etc., those would have been appreciated by the major space powers, but that appreciation was not there in the emerging space countries, or even countries that at that point were not spacefaring. And I don't think, as Pascale said, I don't think there was an awareness of the critical reliance on space systems, even by non-spacefaring countries. And when we began this conversation in the UN at the beginning of the last decade, it took a few years to get countries to realize that this really is a common problem, that we are no longer in the regime where countries that are entering the space arena can afford to relearn the same lessons and make the same mistakes that the leading spacefaring nations made in the first 50 years, because we don't have the luxury of entering a pristine environment. There are now many other actors and systems. And so this idea that space is a limited, the orbital resources and spectrum are limited natural resources, almost counterintuitive idea of space as a limited natural resource. I mean, the Earth orbital space. This took some time to socialize the idea. But we have started to make progress. As you may know, UN Corpus agreed on 21 guidelines for space sustainability after a long process to negotiate these. And I think that quite apart from the actual guidelines themselves, one of the benefits was this increased awareness. So I think we have started on this road. but we have a long way to go in terms of putting in place regulatory frameworks and creating a shared understanding that will allow us to address these issues. For example, how many mega constellations can the world absorb? What is the capacity? How are we going to deal with regulatory issues around those? You mentioned issues about governance of human settlements on other bodies, potentially those established by non-state actors. These are still open questions, and I think we have a long way to go. And certainly we will have to address questions like that, but to my mind, addressing questions around governance, more effective governance of the Earth's orbital environment and cislunar space are, for me, higher priorities.
Marcus, could I just make one quick point to what Peter was saying? Yeah, it was a long process to socialize this whole notion of the sustainability of space, but what I think is going to happen over the next decades are countries that do continue to aspire going to space, having the debate of you are already up there, don't put in regulations or rules that hinder us going to space. And that was one of the fundamental problems when we were negotiating the sustainability guidelines, is that everyone said, that's great for you that are already up there, but if this costs us more money to comply with the guidelines after you develop things where you didn't have the guidelines, then that's not fair. And I think that is going to be a continuing issue is, I may not be in space yet, but I want to be, and don't place burdensome international rules on me that would affect my ability to get up there just because you're already there.
Yeah. And of course, the counterpoint to that is that, if the international community does come up with rules like this, there is a certain reciprocity as well, whereby, countries that have the experiences in the conduct of safe and sustainable space activities should share those with emerging space actors, so that these new rules aren't seen as a way of raising barriers to entry for aspiring new space actors.
I just want.
Does it make a difference? Yeah, please, Pascale.
No, just one sentence. It needs a coordinated dialogue between different stakeholders, because it is mostly also a lack of knowledge. You have some space entrepreneurs or some countries who say, I really want to go there and I really want, to use this technology without enough knowledge about the planetary or the lunar environment, for instance. And this is something where you really need a coordinated dialogue, and that has to be somehow an umbrella organization or several organizations which are really taking up this task.
Yeah, I mean, technology is great, but technology has not yet, for example, answered the question how we can really resist the radioactivity on Mars, or how the human body can deal with only a third of gravity, and what this will do to the muscles and so on. So there are some limitations or questions that actually are not yet answered by technology, and also not by political and societal framing. Go ahead.
So are we in another topic now, or?
No. I'd like to take a look at the Q&A a little bit. People who sent in questions, and they have been partly answered, but I want to just raise them here. Michael asks, to what extent are our current activities in LEO contrary to our longer-term goals for the Moon and Mars? I think, Peter, you made a point about that already, that we are starting to understand the differences, the physical differences in orbit and technology. What would you say? how different is a LEO activity from a Moon or Mars mission? To what extent?
Well, I'm in what regards?
I guess we don't need to discuss it technically. I guess we need to discuss it in terms of are we applying the same criteria? Are we facing the same questions and issues? Or can you say, for example, space traffic management, really no issue around the Moon at the moment? I guess that would be the answer at the moment. While closer to Earth, it's very important.
Yes, but I mean, of course, any missions, that intend to go beyond LEO have to pass through the LEO environment anyway. So those concerns, to some extent, apply to such missions, at least in that phase. But I think, in future we will start to see more. The need for more situational awareness in the cislunar environment.
So the first answer to this question would be, if we spoil already the low Earth orbits with too much traffic, then we can't even go further anymore. Right.
Well, yeah, but I think as Peter mentioned, the operations in cislunar are another thing that needs to be looked at. And if I'm not mistaken, the Artemis Accords actually do include provision for adhering to the orbital debris guidelines. Now, whether they're applicable to the Moon or not is another question. But I think that again is another interesting issue there. If we have the Gateway project orbiting the Moon, what's going to be the regime in cislunar?
Yeah. George, which is probably also linked to regime. What is your view on Martian independence, where the resource extraction is primarily for the local planet rather than the colonizing one?
Well, I tried already to get a hold of this question, but I don't really know what it means. First, I think we haven't discussed, all the bold visions, of space hotels, making humanity a multi-planet species, free-floating colonies, and so on. We have not discussed that. I think that's a very important thing to inspire, society. We are now really somehow at the beginning of learning, in situ resource utilization on the Moon, surface operations, in order to prepare for bringing humans to Moon, and learning, all our traits in order really to have extensive robotic but also human exploration of Mars. And this will take some decades, because we just, as you said before, we don't know enough about space medicine yet. We have to do a lot of research in order to bring humans safe there and bring them back. So we are still at that stage, and we are not yet at the stage of colonizing. We are not yet of the stage of in situ resource utilization on Mars, though we have, the first experiment now on Perseverance. It takes some time. So I don't know exactly what is meant with this question. I would just go a stepwise approach and try really to study Mars robotically, which is actually happening right now in a very exciting fashion, and see also the lunar program as a stepping stone, to Mars exploration. And human exploration of Mars will still take a lot of time. And before we colonize and then really extract and terraform Mars, I think this is really something which is a little bit far away.
Yeah, I think what is interesting about this question, and maybe that's just subjective and me reading it, but It has a lot to do with the question how earthbound are our space activities and how earthbound is our thinking when we go out into space. Or in other words, when we use the word colony, we are thinking that it has a starting point, the journey, and there's people coming from Earth and colonizing as earthens another planet. But you could also, and earthbound also in the sense that we are highlighting all the time in order to get the societal support, how beneficial space technologies are on Earth. But the interesting thing of this question is how independent could another celestial body and humankind extending into space become one day, or in other words, how far could we really reinvent things that we have done and invented differently on Earth? That I was reading that into the question, but obviously this is far away, as you say, big picture, and maybe fed into the discussion process right now, but it will only have impact in 20, 30, 40 years.
So, Markus, I wanted to, this is a good, I like your perspective on the question. I like Pascale's answer, and then her earlier discussion of these things taking so many years and decades to develop. When we finally get, to Mars for these sample returns or exploration. One of the ways that I look at this is that it's not so much the fact that you will meet that endpoint. It's the continuum along that line. So if you say, I am going to Mars and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, you're going to have to develop a whole set of technologies, scientific R&D, financing, everything else. But along that path, you may realize, well, I really don't want to go to Mars. I'm going to veer off and do something else. So it's that whole notion of having an end, a destination, but then you're developing all the technologies in order to do that. And you realize, well, maybe the destination wasn't so important. It's what we've just developed that really is important. And we're going to go and we're going to use it for something else. Or we discovered something even more meaningful than what we originally intended to do. And that goes to the whole notion again of making sure that we aren't standing in a way of somebody wanting to go someplace or do a certain thing, whether it's decades away, but allowing them to make that journey and adjust as they move along.
Sounds like, thanks, Ken, some really piece of wisdom. In a way, being underway is the goal, and the objectives might change. And the good thing is that through our discussions and through our conversations on international levels and on different levels, that actually we can move the boundaries and the criteria and redefine the objectives and influence the entire movement to space. So I think it's time, we have an hour nearly, to leave you. You have a long day in front of you, I know, especially on the US side. We thank you really very, very much that you joined this. Discussions like that are always a start, and the way is the goal again, also for such discussions. So I'm really looking forward to continue this on one level or the other with you. Pascale, Peter, and Ken, thanks a lot for joining today. And I'd just like to come to the upcoming events that we are planning. Next things from SpaceWatch.Global. There is a Space Café UAE, the United Arab Emirates version on the 19th. Day later, Space Café with Teresa. You can see it on the screen here. 17th of April is 33 minutes with Chris, and the Scottish Space Café is end of April, 29th. And we have another one, the Bay Area, China, Space Café on the 23rd.
You are everywhere.
We are extending, and Pascale, the idea really is, to enable discussions that are useful for you, for people like you, and we build a platform, and we invite, and we want to hear all voices, and have serious discussions, and not only one shots, but continue them. Because as we all understood, we are on a long, very long journey, and a very exciting one. So thanks again, everybody. Come to subscribe to our newsletters if you haven't yet done so, daily or bi-weekly. Come and visit our website, SpaceWatch.Global. Take a look at the fan shop if you want. And don't forget, stay or become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.